You know, when I signed up for the Galactic Exchange student program, I thought the hardest part would be learning to breathe methane, or figuring out alien toilet etiquette. Turns out, the real challenge was trying not to laugh when Professor Valdrix introduced himself as the foremost expert on primitive species behavioral patterns in the known galaxy. Picture this guy, if you will. 8 feet tall, purple skin that shimmers like he dunked himself in glitter, 4 arms that he waves around constantly like he's conducting an invisible orchestra, and a voice that sounds like someone gargling gravel mixed with superiority complex. He's got these beady little yellow eyes that practically scream, "I have 17 degrees and 0 common sense," and he talks like he's dictating his memoirs to future generations of worshippers. "Ah yes," he says, looking down at me like I'm a particularly interesting bug. "You must be the... what do you call yourselves again? Who-mens? How delightfully primitive. I do hope you can keep up with our advanced curriculum." Now I'm Captain Jake Murphy, formerly of the Earth Defense Force, currently the only human stupid enough to think attending the most prestigious university in the galaxy was a good career move. 28 years old, stubborn as a mule, and apparently the first member of my species to qualify for their remedial sentience program. Yeah, that's what they call it, remedial sentience. Like we're still figuring out how to use opposable thumbs. The campus itself is pretty impressive, I'll give them that. Floating crystalline spires that twist through dimensions I can't even pronounce. Gravity wells that let you walk on the ceiling for no apparent reason other than showing off. And libraries that supposedly contain all the knowledge in the universe. Though if that were true, you'd think someone would have figured out that putting the bathroom signs in 47 different alien languages, but not the one spoken by your newest student, might be a design flaw. "Now then, human Jake," Professor Valdrix continues, because apparently my species name doubles as my first name in his mind. "Today, you will observe a demonstration of advanced xenobiological domestication techniques. I have successfully tamed one of the most feared predators in the known galaxy." He leads me through corridors filled with other students who stop and stare like I'm some kind of walking museum exhibit. There's a group of crystal beings who literally ring like wind chimes when they move, a few gas cloud entities floating in containment suits, and something that looks like a cross between a spider and a disco ball. They all whisper among themselves in languages that sound like someone gargling alphabet soup mixed with dial-up internet noises. "Behold," Valdrix announces as we enter his laboratory, throwing all 4 arms wide in a gesture that would make Shakespeare weep. "My greatest achievement in the field of interspecies behavioral modification." The lab looks exactly like what you'd expect from someone with an ego the size of a small moon. Walls covered in certificates, awards, and what I assume are degrees in pretentious studies. There are holographic displays showing brain scans of various species, including one labeled Human Neural Activity that apparently shows the complexity of a goldfish. Gee, thanks for the vote of confidence, Doc. But then I see the cage. And the thing inside it. Now, I've seen some scary stuff in my time. Fought in the Centauri border wars, stared down a pack of Regelian deathworms, even survived a blind date with my ex-commanding officer's daughter. But this thing, this Gorath, as Valdrix calls it, is something else entirely. Picture a wolf. Now make it the size of a small tank. Give it 6 legs, each ending in claws that could probably slice through starship hull plating. Add scales instead of fur, scales that shift color from deep black to angry red depending on its mood. Throw in a mouthful of teeth that would make a great white shark jealous, and eyes that glow like molten copper. Oh, and did I mention it's currently making a sound like a garbage disposal trying to eat a chainsaw? Magnificent, is it not? Valdrix preens, completely oblivious to the fact that his domesticated pet looks like it wants to use his bones as toothpicks. The Terror-Hound of Krylax, apex predator of one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. And I, through superior intellect and advanced psychological conditioning, have rendered it completely docile. I look at Gorath. Gorath looks back at me. Docile is not the word I'd use. The thing is pacing back and forth in its enclosure like a caged hurricane, leaving gouges in what appears to be reinforced duralloy flooring. Every few seconds it lets out another one of those charming growls that sounds like the universe's way of saying you're about to have a very bad day. Fascinating, I say, because what else do you say when someone shows you their pet death machine? How long have you had him? 6 of your Earth months, Valdrix replies, consulting a holographic tablet that probably cost more than my entire home planet's GDP. The domestication process is proceeding exactly according to my calculations. Any day now, he will achieve complete behavioral compliance. I watch Gorath slam his massive head against the energy barrier containing him, and I'm starting to think Valdrix's calculations might need a software update. But hey, I'm just a primitive human. What do I know about apex predators and behavioral psychology? Apparently, I'm about to find out. Over the next few weeks, I get to witness what can only be described as the slow-motion academic equivalent of a train wreck. See, Gorath isn't just unfriendly. He's getting progressively worse, like a furry natural disaster with a serious attitude problem. It starts small. Well, small for a creature that could probably bench press a shuttlecraft. First, he stops eating the scientifically formulated nutritional substrate that Valdrix keeps feeding him. Then he starts destroying everything in his enclosure that isn't nailed down. And then he starts working on the stuff that is nailed down. The reinforced feeding dispensers, shredded. The environmental controls, sparking wreckage. The holographic entertainment system designed to stimulate his primitive neural pathways. Let's just say it's providing a lot more sparks than holograms these days. But the real problem is the noise. Sweet merciful cosmos, the noise. Gorath has apparently decided that his life's mission is to provide a 24/7 soundtrack of growling, snarling, and what I can only describe as the sound a blender would make if you fed it gravel and existential dread. It's gotten so bad that students 3 floors up are complaining about the atmospheric disturbances. Professor Valdrix, meanwhile, is having what you might charitably call an intellectual meltdown. I find him one morning surrounded by floating holographic charts, quantum equations, and what appears to be the alien equivalent of a very expensive nervous breakdown. The behavioral matrices don't align, he mutters, waving all 4 arms at a display showing Gorath's psychological profile. According to 17 different theoretical models, the subject should be exhibiting submissive pack-bonding behaviors by now. Instead, his aggression indices are increasing exponentially. Maybe he's just having a bad day, I suggest, because apparently I hate myself enough to keep attending these sessions. Valdrix looks at me like I just suggested we solve the university's energy crisis with a hamster wheel. Bad day? Human Jake, we are dealing with complex psychological conditioning algorithms, not primitive emotional responses. There are variables to consider. Quantum fluctuations in the local psionic field, possible dimensional displacement affecting his temporal lobe functions, perhaps even microscopic parasitic infections altering his neurochemical balance. Right, because it couldn't possibly be something simple. That's when Dr. Thessarian shows up. Dean Thessarian is what happens when you take a corporate executive, run them through a blender with a squid in a very bad mood, then give them tenure and a power complex. She's got tentacles where her hair should be, skin like polished marble, and the kind of smile that makes you check to make sure your wallet's still in your pocket. "Professor Valdrix," she says in a voice that could freeze hydrogen. "I'm receiving complaints about your research project. Apparently the noise is affecting productivity in the entire academic district." "Dean Thessarian, I assure you the situation is well under control," Valdrix replies, which would be more convincing if Gorath wasn't currently treating his food dispenser like a personal punching bag in the background. "I simply need more time to recalibrate the behavioral modification protocols." Thessarian's tentacles writhe in what I'm pretty sure is the alien equivalent of an eye roll. "Professor, you have 48 Earth hours to resolve this situation. If that creature cannot be properly domesticated, it will be transferred to the university's disposal facility." And by disposal facility, she doesn't mean they're going to find him a nice farm where he can run free with other Terror-Hounds. After she leaves, Valdrix goes into full panic mode. He starts consulting every database, every expert, every theoretical framework he can get his 4 hands on. Dr. Zenthos from the psychology department suggests meditation crystals. Professor Quillian from biochemistry recommends a full-spectrum analysis of Gorath's digestive enzyme production. The Dean of Advanced Theoretical Studies proposes building a quantum resonance chamber to realign his emotional frequency. Each suggestion is more ridiculous than the last, and each one completely ignores what seems pretty obvious to me. But hey, I'm just a primitive human whose species apparently hasn't figured out which end of a stick is the pointy one, so what do I know? I watch them all debate and theorize and overcomplicate what should be a simple problem, and I start to understand why Gorath looks so frustrated. If I had to listen to this much academic babble while stuck in a cage, I'd probably start eating the furniture too. The clock is ticking, the Terror-Hound is getting more aggressive by the hour, and the so-called smartest beings in the galaxy are about to let a magnificent creature get put down because they can't figure out something that any dog owner back on Earth would spot in about 5 minutes. But like I said, I'm just a human. What could I possibly know about handling dangerous animals? Turns out quite a bit more than I thought. The next day, I walk into Valdrix's lab to find what can only be described as organized chaos with a PhD. There are at least a dozen alien academics crowded around Gorath's enclosure, each one armed with enough scanning equipment to terraform a small moon. The air is thick with the kind of intellectual panic that happens when really smart people realize they might actually be really stupid. "Ah, human Jake," Valdrix calls out, sounding like a man whose entire worldview is slowly crumbling around him. "Perhaps you would like to observe as the galaxy's finest minds tackle this complex behavioral anomaly." I look at the galaxy's finest minds. Dr. Zenthos is waving what appears to be a glowing crystal the size of a watermelon at Gorath, while chanting something that sounds like a washing machine having an existential crisis. Professor Quillian is taking readings, with a device that's beeping more frantically than a smoke detector at a barbecue convention. And Dr. Vexthari from the Department of Applied Theoretical Physics is trying to explain how Gorath's aggression might be caused by quantum emotional displacement in the fifth-dimensional matrix. Meanwhile, Gorath looks like he's about ready to quantum displace his way through the energy barrier and introduce everyone to some very practical fourth-dimensional physics involving his teeth. "You know," I say, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment, "maybe the problem isn't that complicated. Maybe he's just lonely." The entire room goes silent. Not the good kind of silent, like when someone's about to reveal the meaning of life. The bad kind of silent, like when you've just suggested that gravity might be optional. Dr. Zenthos stops mid-chant and stares at me. "Lonely? Human Jake, we are dealing with an apex predator from one of the most hostile environments in known space. Loneliness is a primitive emotional construct that requires advanced social cognition." "Right," I say, "and Terror-Hounds are pack hunters, aren't they? Social creatures who live in family groups?" Valdrix waves one of his arms dismissively. "Certainly, but that is merely instinctual behavior. We have moved beyond such simplistic analysis. The psychological frameworks involved here require consideration of multidimensional variables." I watch Gorath pace back and forth, and I swear the poor guy looks like every shelter dog I've ever seen. That restless energy, the way he keeps looking toward the lab entrance, like he's waiting for someone to come back, the dejected slump to his massive shoulders when nobody pays attention to him except to poke him with another scanning device. "Have you tried just, spending time with him?" I ask. "Talking to him, maybe some basic socialization?" Professor Quillian nearly drops his scanner. "Socialization? Human Jake, this creature's brain operates on entirely different neurochemical principles than ours. Communication would require establishing quantum entanglement between cognitive matrices, not simple verbal interaction. Or, I suggest, you could try scratching behind his ears." The silence this time is so profound, I think I can actually hear the universe questioning its life choices. Dr. Vexthari clears what I assume is her throat, though it sounds more like a malfunctioning air conditioner. "Human Jake, while we appreciate your quaint primitive insights, this situation requires the application of advanced scientific methodologies, not the crude trial and error approaches of lesser evolved species." "Lesser evolved," I repeat, watching them prepare to attach what looks like a helmet made of Christmas lights to Gorath's head. "Right, because clearly the advanced approach is working so well." That's when Valdrix pulls me aside, all four arms gesticulating like he's trying to flag down aircraft. "Human Jake, I understand that your species has a certain intuitive relationship with animal behavior given your recent evolutionary emergence from a primitive hunter-gatherer society. But we are dealing with forces and principles that require millions of years of advanced cognitive development to comprehend." "Forces and principles," I say, watching Gorath try to bite through an energy barrier while Dr. Zinthos waves his crystal harder. "Like maybe the force of being a social animal stuck in solitary confinement, and the principle that most creatures get cranky when they're isolated and bored?" Valdrix blinks his yellow eyes at me. "But the psychological conditioning algorithms clearly indicate that isolation increases behavioral compliance in territorial species." "Maybe your algorithms are wrong." I might as well have suggested that mathematics was just a really elaborate practical joke. The entire room turns to stare at me like I've just announced my intention to marry a black hole. "Wrong?" Dr. Zenthos sputtered, his crystal now glowing bright enough to serve as a small sun. "These algorithms represent thousands of years of accumulated knowledge from the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy." "Yeah," I say, "and they're about to get a magnificent creature killed, because none of you will consider the possibility that sometimes the simple answer is the right answer." That's when Gorath lets out a roar that rattles equipment 3 labs over, and I realize we're running out of time for academic debates. Time to see if human stupidity can triumph over alien intelligence. Again, you know what they say about the best laid plans of mice and men? Well, apparently they don't say anything about the plans of Terror-Hounds. because Gorath decides to take matters into his own six-legged paws. It happens during what Dr. Vexteri calls a critical recalibration phase of her quantum emotional displacement theory. She's got poor Gorath hooked up to enough monitoring equipment to staff a small space station, and she's explaining to everyone how the readings prove that his aggression is caused by interdimensional psychological feedback loops. When the feedback loop decides it's had enough, Gorath lets out a roar that I swear makes the lights dim, and then he does something that apparently wasn't in any of their advanced behavioral prediction models. He breaks out. Not through the energy barrier, mind you. That would be too simple. No, Gorath goes full clever girl on them and smashes through the reinforced floor of his enclosure, coming up through what used to be the lab's main computer terminal in an explosion of sparks, twisted metal, and very surprised alien academics. Chaos doesn't begin to describe what happens next. Dr. Zenthos drops his crystal, which promptly explodes into what I can only describe as a small supernova of sparkles. Professor Quillian starts shrieking in a frequency that makes my teeth ache. Dr. Vextari activates some kind of personal force field that immediately shorts out from all the ambient energy discharge, leaving her looking like she stuck her tentacles in a light socket. And Valdrix? Valdrix does what any rational, highly educated, super-intelligent alien academic does when faced with a crisis. He faints. All four arms just go limp and he drops like a sack of purple potatoes, leaving me standing there as the only conscious being between a very angry apex predator and a room full of panicking academics who are discovering that all their theoretical knowledge doesn't mean much when 600 pounds of scaled fury is giving them a practical demonstration in applied terror. Gorath stands in the middle of the destruction, scales shifting from black to that angry red color, and for a moment, I think I'm about to become a very educational example of why humans shouldn't have been admitted to this university in the first place. But then he looks at me, really looks at me, and I see something in those molten copper eyes that all the galaxy's finest minds completely missed. He's not angry. He's desperate. This isn't a monster throwing a tantrum. This is a social creature who's been isolated for months, poked and prodded and studied like a specimen instead of treated like a living being. And he's finally reached his breaking point. So while everyone else is running around screaming about containment protocols and emergency procedures, I do the dumbest, most human thing possible. I walk toward him. "Easy there, big guy," I say, keeping my voice calm and steady. I know, these guys are idiots. Trust me, if I had to listen to lectures about quantum emotional displacement all day, I'd want to eat the furniture too." Gorath's head tilts slightly, like he's trying to figure out why this tiny, soft creature isn't running away like all the others. His scales start to shift back toward black, which I'm hoping is a good sign. "Here's the thing," I continue, still walking slowly forward while alarm klaxons start going off in the background. "I think you're just lonely, aren't you? All those theories about behavioral modification and psychological conditioning, and nobody bothered to consider that maybe you just need a friend." I'm close enough now that I can see my reflection in his copper eyes, close enough that he could turn me into organic paste without breaking a sweat. The smart thing, the rational thing, the thing any sane person would do is run. Instead, I reach out and scratch behind his ears. You know that moment in old Earth movies, when the music swells and everything goes into slow motion? This is like that, except instead of violins, there's the sound of emergency sirens. And instead of a romantic sunset, there's a laboratory that looks like it got hit by a very localized and very angry natural disaster. Gorath goes completely still for about 3 seconds. Then, and I swear this is true, this 600-pound apex predator from one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy starts making a sound like a diesel engine purring. The effect on the room is immediate. The screaming stops, the running around stops, even the alarm klaxons seem to get confused and trail off uncertainly. Gorath leans into my scratching, his massive head tilting to give me better access to what are apparently very itchy spots behind his ears. His tail, which I hadn't even noticed before because it was pressed flat against his body in stress, starts doing something that can only be described as wagging. Dr. Vextari, still looking like she went 10 rounds with a lightning storm, stares at us with an expression of complete bewilderment. That's impossible. The quantum matrices clearly indicated that direct physical contact would result in immediate aggressive response patterns. "Yeah, well," I say, still scratching while Gorath makes happy rumbling noises that sound like a freight train being tickled. "Maybe your quantum matrices need to account for the fact that sometimes a lonely dog is just a lonely dog, no matter how many teeth it has." Professor Valdrix, who's apparently regained consciousness just in time to see his entire worldview get demolished by basic animal psychology, sits up and stares at us like we've just violated several fundamental laws of physics. Which, come to think of it, we probably have. The aftermath of what I'm now calling the Great Ear-Scratching Incident of 2387 is something to behold. Picture, if you will, the most advanced laboratory in one of the galaxy's most prestigious universities, now looking like it was redecorated by a hurricane with anger management issues, sparking electronics, overturned furniture, alien academics scattered around like confetti after a very unsuccessful party, and in the middle of it all, me giving belly rubs to what was supposedly an untamable apex predator. Yeah, belly rubs. Turns out, when you flip a Terror-Hound onto his back and start rubbing his scaled tummy, he makes the same blissful expression as every dog that's ever lived. His 6 legs kick in the air, his copper eyes go half-closed in pure contentment. And that diesel engine purring gets so loud it's probably registering on seismic equipment 3-star systems away. This is unprecedented, Dr. Vexthari whispers, like she's witnessing the birth of a new universe. Which, in a way, I suppose she is. The universe where alien academics realize they might not know everything. The behavioral matrices never predicted this level of positive response to simple tactile stimulation. That's because your behavioral matrices, I say while scratching a particularly good spot that makes Gorath's back leg do that thing all dogs do, were designed by people who think friendship can be quantified with mathematical formulas. Professor Valdrix has managed to get back on his feet, all 4 arms trembling as he tries to process what he's seeing. But the aggression indices, the territorial behavior patterns, the complete rejection of domestication protocols, were all signs of a stressed, lonely animal acting out because nobody was treating him like a living creature instead of a research specimen, I finish. Gorath here wasn't being aggressive. He was trying to get attention the only way he knew how. As if to prove my point, Gorath rolls over and starts nuzzling my shoulder with his massive head, making little whimpering sounds that translate roughly to, "Please don't stop the ear-scratching, tiny, soft friend." Dr. Zentho, still clutching the remains of his meditation crystal, looks like someone just explained quantum mechanics to him using interpretive dance. But the psychological conditioning protocols clearly stated that isolation enhances behavioral compliance in predatory species. Right, because nothing says, "I want to be your friend," like locking someone in a cage and ignoring them for 6 months, I reply, giving Gorath's head another scratch that makes him practically melt with happiness. Here's a radical idea. Maybe Terror-Hounds are called Terror-Hounds because they're terrifying when they're miserable, not because they're inherently aggressive. Impossible, Professor Quillian sputters, waving his scanner at us like it might somehow make the readings make sense. The neurochemical analysis clearly shows elevated stress hormones and aggression markers. Yeah, elevated stress hormones, I say. You know what causes stress? Being alone, bored, and having nobody to talk to except people who treat you like a lab rat. Watch this. I stop scratching for a moment and step back. Gorath immediately sits up, looking around frantically, scales starting to shift back toward that worried red color. Then I step forward again and resume the ear scratching, and he practically melts back into happy black scales and contented rumbling. Social bonding, I explain to the assembled crowd of geniuses. He doesn't want to be alone. He wants to be part of a pack, and since you idiots never bothered to actually interact with him, he never got the chance to bond with anyone. But surely, Dr. Vexthari protests, the complexity of interspecies psychological integration requires sophisticated analysis of cognitive compatibility matrices and emotional resonance frequencies. I look at her. I look at Gorath, who's now lying on his back again with his tongue lolling out in pure bliss. I look back at her. He's a dog, I say, a really big, really scary dog from a really dangerous planet. But fundamentally, he's a dog. Dogs want 3 things: food, attention, and someone to love them. You gave him food but ignored the other 2, so he acted like any dog would act when they're lonely and bored. He destroyed things to get attention and made noise to express his frustration. Valdrix starts pacing, all 4 arms waving frantically. But the theoretical frameworks, the established protocols, the centuries of accumulated research on predator psychology were all written by people who never actually spent time with the animals they were studying, I interrupt. You want to know the secret to understanding animal behavior? It's not quantum matrices or neurochemical analysis or whatever other fancy words you want to throw around. It's empathy. It's looking at a creature and asking yourself, what would I want if I were in that situation? Empathy? Professor Quillian repeats the word like it's some kind of alien concept. Which, come to think of it, it apparently is. Yeah, Empathy. The ability to understand what someone else is feeling. Gorath was feeling lonely, scared, and frustrated, so he acted out. I recognize those feelings because I've felt them too. We all have. Gorath chooses that moment to roll over and rest his massive head on my lap, looking up at me with those copper eyes like I'm the best thing that's happened to him since, well, probably ever. The pack bonding response is remarkably rapid, Dr. Vexthari observes, frantically taking notes on a handheld device. The subject has clearly identified the human as a suitable alpha figure. He's not identifying me as an alpha, I correct, scratching under Gorath's chin and watching his eyes close in contentment. He's just happy to have a friend, someone who actually pays attention to him and treats him with kindness instead of like a specimen to be studied. And that's when I realized the most important thing about this whole situation. It's not just about Gorath. It's about every creature in this university, every being that gets classified and categorized and studied but never actually understood. How many other behavioral problems are really just loneliness? How many aggressive specimens are just scared and want someone to care about them? You know what the really funny part is? I say to the room full of supposedly superior intellects. If any of you had bothered to read basic Earth animal psychology texts, you'd have figured this out in about 5 minutes. Dogs have been humanity's companions for thousands of years. We know how pack bonding works. We know what social isolation does to intelligent creatures. We've known this stuff since before we figured out fire. The silence that follows is the kind that happens when really smart people realize they've been really stupid about something really obvious. But hey, at least they're learning, even if it took a primitive human and a lonely Terror-Hound to teach them the most basic lesson in the universe. Sometimes, everyone just needs a friend. 3 weeks later, I'm walking across the campus quad with my new best friend trotting beside me like the galaxy's most intimidating golden retriever. Word is spread about what happened in Valdrick's lab, and let me tell you, the university rumor mill works faster than a quantum communicator. The story has grown in the telling, as stories do. Depending on who you ask, I either tamed the savage beast through mystical human magic, or am some kind of interspecies communications savant, or I've secretly been trained as an elite animal handler by Earth's military forces. The truth, that I just treated a lonely creature with basic kindness, is apparently too simple for most people to believe. But the results speak for themselves. Gorath has become the campus's unofficial mascot and my constant companion. He follows me to lectures, where he curls up beside my chair and occasionally provides commentary in the form of rumbling growls when professors say something particularly stupid. Which, let me tell you, happens more often than you'd think. Professor Valdrick has undergone what you might charitably call a complete philosophical transformation. Gone is the pompous academic who lectured about primitive species and superior intellect. In his place is someone who's discovered that maybe, just maybe, intelligence comes in forms that can't be measured by the number of degrees on your wall. "Human Jake," he says, approaching us as we cross the crystalline plaza where students gather between classes. He's carrying a stack of Earth publications, actual paper books that must have cost him a fortune to import. "I've been studying your species' literature on animal behavior and psychology. Fascinating work. This researcher, Pavlov, his theories on behavioral conditioning are quite revolutionary." "Valdrick's," I say, trying not to laugh. "Ivan Pavlov died about 400 years ago. We've learned a lot since then." His yellow eyes widen with something that might be excitement or terror. It's hard to tell. "You mean there's more? Advanced techniques beyond even these groundbreaking methodologies?" "Oh, buddy," I say, scratching behind Gorath's ears as he leans against my leg. "You have no idea. Wait until you discover clicker training." The change in campus dynamics has been remarkable to watch. Students who used to give me a wide berth now approach cautiously, fascinated by the human who walks around with an apex predator like it's the most natural thing in the galaxy. Some of them are brave enough to ask questions. "Is it true," whispers a crystalline being whose name sounds like wind chimes in a hurricane, "that you can communicate telepathically with dangerous creatures?" No telepathy involved, I assure her, watching as Gorath spots a group of gas cloud entities playing some kind of sport and wags his tail with interest. "Just paying attention to body language and treating him like he has feelings." "Feelings," she chimes, "literally. But the psychological literature clearly states that non-sapient species operate purely on instinct-based behavioral programming." Before I can answer, Gorath demonstrates exactly how non-sapient he is by gently approaching one of the gas cloud students who dropped their study materials. He carefully picks up their datapad in his massive jaws and brings it back to them, tail wagging the entire time. "Very instinct-based," I say dryly, as the gas cloud entity thanks Gorath in what I can only assume is their version of baby talk. But the real changes have been happening in other parts of the university. Word of the human method of animal handling has spread, and suddenly I'm getting requests from other departments. The Agricultural Sciences Division wants me to look at their uncooperative livestock specimens. The Xenobiology Department has a few creatures that have been exhibiting problematic behaviors. Even the Dean of Advanced Studies has quietly asked if I might take a look at the campus groundskeeping creatures, which have apparently been less than enthusiastic about their assigned duties. My first stop was the Agricultural Division, where Professor Clintar, a being who looks like a cross between a praying mantis and a filing cabinet, shows me their prize-breeding specimens, a herd of creatures that look like purple cattle if cattle were the size of small buildings and had tentacles instead of legs. The Morvanian nutrition beasts have become increasingly difficult to manage, Professor Clintar explains, clicking and buzzing in what I assume is frustration. They refuse to enter the feeding areas. They've been damaging containment structures, and their nutritional output has decreased by 37%. I look at the feeding areas, which are basically sterile metal boxes barely large enough for the creatures to stand in. The containment structures are energy barriers that prevent the animals from moving more than a few feet in any direction. And the nutritional output apparently refers to some kind of milk production, though calling it nutrition seems generous, when the creatures producing it look miserable. When was the last time they were allowed to move around freely, I ask. Professor Clintar's compound eyes focus on me with the intensity of someone trying to understand a particularly difficult mathematical equation. Move around freely? But that would decrease efficiency. The optimal nutrition production occurs when energy expenditure is minimized through restricted movement protocols. Right, I say, watching one of the Morvanian beasts press against its energy barrier, trying to reach another beast just a few feet away. And I bet their output started decreasing right around the time you implemented those protocols. It takes 3 hours of patient explanation and demonstration, but eventually Professor Clintar agrees to a trial run of expanded containment areas and social interaction time. The results are immediate and dramatic. The creatures perk up, start communicating with each other in low harmonic sounds, and within a week their nutritional output has increased by 50%. Remarkable, Professor Clintar buzzes, watching the beasts graze in their expanded enclosures while their young play together nearby. The correlation between psychological well-being and physiological productivity was not accounted for in our efficiency models. Funny how that works, I say, scratching Gorath behind the ears as he watches the young Morvanian beasts with what I swear is a paternal expression. The Xenobiology Department provides even more dramatic results. Dr. Zek Samira, who looks like someone tried to build a dragon out of spare spaceship parts, has been struggling with a collection of creatures she calls rainbow serpents from the cloud forests of Altair 7. Beautiful creatures about the size of earth pythons but with scales that shift through every color in the spectrum. They've been refusing to eat and showing signs of what she calls cognitive deterioration. It takes me about 30 seconds to figure out the problem. The rainbow serpents are housed individually in climate-controlled terrariums that maintain perfect temperature, humidity, and atmospheric composition. They have everything they need for physical survival and absolutely nothing they need for psychological well-being. They're social creatures, I explained to Dr. Zexmir as we watched the serpents through their transparent enclosures. They're all pressed against the sides, facing each other, scales shifting through muted, sad colors. Look at how they're trying to get to each other. They're not declining because of disease or malnutrition. They're dying of loneliness. But the scientific literature clearly indicates that serpentine species are primarily solitary. Dr. Zixmira protests, her metallic scales clanking as she gestures. Social interaction should be unnecessary for their psychological stability. The scientific literature was probably written by people who never bothered to observe how they actually behave in their natural environment, I point out, or by researchers who assumed that just because they look like earth snakes, they must behave like earth snakes. When we combine the rainbow serpents into a larger, communal habitat, the transformation is immediate. Their scales brighten to brilliant, joyful colors. They begin intertwining with each other in complex patterns that are clearly some form of social interaction. Within days, they're eating again, and within a week they're exhibiting behaviors that Dr. Zexamir has never seen before. What appears to be play behavior, including games that involve rapid color changes and coordinated movement patterns. They're talking, Dr. Zexamir whispers in amazement, watching the serpents create complex light shows with their shifting scales. They're actually talking to each other through chromatic communication. We never knew they were capable of such sophisticated social interaction. You never knew because you never gave them the chance, I say, watching Gorath's tail wag as he observes the rainbow serpent's light show with obvious delight. But the most rewarding case comes from an unexpected source. Dean Thessarium herself approaches me one afternoon as I'm leaving the library, her tentacles writhing in what I've learned to recognize as embarrassment. "Human Jake," she says, her marble-like features showing more emotion than I've ever seen from her. "I have a personal request. It concerns my office companion." It turns out that Dean Thessarian has had what she calls a prestige pet for the past 2 years, a creature called a crystal wing from the diamond caves of Vega 9. Beautiful creatures that look like a cross between a butterfly and a living gemstone. Crystal wings are apparently status symbols among high-ranking academics. They're supposed to be elegant, graceful, and quiet. Thessarian's crystal wing is none of those things. For the past 6 months, it's been what she describes as increasingly problematic, refusing to display its wings, making distressing sounds, and showing signs of what appears to be severe stress. When she takes me to her office, I see the problem immediately. The crystal wing, which should be a creature of stunning beauty, is huddled in the corner of an ornate but tiny cage, its crystalline wings folded tightly against its body. The cage is positioned on Thessarian's desk like a decorative object, surrounded by official documents and academic awards. "When was the last time you let him out of the cage?" I ask. Thessarian's tentacles coil with what might be confusion. "Out of the cage? But crystal wings are display creatures. They're meant to be observed, not interacted with." I look at the creature, notice how its faceted eyes track every movement in the room, how it perks up slightly when we approach. This isn't a display piece. This is an intelligent being that's been treated like living jewelry. "D. Thessarian," I say carefully, "I think your crystal wing is bored out of his mind." It takes considerable persuasion, but eventually Thessarian agrees to let me open the cage. The crystal wing doesn't immediately fly out, as I expected. Instead, it cautiously extends one wing, then the other, as if testing to make sure this isn't some kind of trick. Then, slowly, it begins to glow. The transformation is breathtaking. The crystal wing's body, which had been dim and lifeless, begins to radiate soft, warm light. Its wings unfold to reveal patterns of incredible complexity and beauty, like stained glass windows designed by someone who understood the mathematics of light itself. It rises from the cage in a spiral of luminescence, circling the room in a display of pure joy that brings tears to my eyes. "Magnificent," Thessarian whispers, and for the first time since I've known her, she sounds genuinely moved. "I had no idea they were capable of such beauty." "They're not just capable of it," I explain as the crystal wing settles on my shoulder, its warm glow pulsing in what feels like gratitude. "They need it." The light displays aren't just pretty decorations. They're how crystal wings communicate, how they express emotion, how they connect with the world around them. Keeping him in a cage was like keeping a musician from ever hearing sound. The crystal wing spends the next hour exploring Thessarian's office, investigating everything with obvious curiosity, occasionally returning to us to share its discoveries in pulses of colored light. When it finally settles on Thessarian's desk, it's not hiding in the corner. It's positioned where it can see everything, wings partially spread in what I recognize as a relaxed, comfortable posture. "I never realized," Thessarian says quietly, watching her companion glow contentedly in the afternoon light streaming through her office windows, "that intelligence could take so many different forms." As Gorath and I walk home that evening, past students who now wave and greet us by name, past professors who nod respectfully instead of looking down their noses, I realize that something fundamental has changed at this university. It's not just about better animal care, though that's certainly part of it. It's about recognition, a recognition that intelligence doesn't always look like what we expect, that sentience comes in forms we might not immediately understand, and that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from the simplest acts of kindness. My first year at Galactic University is almost over, and I've learned more than I ever expected. Not about advanced physics or interdimensional mathematics, or any of the subjects I came here to study. I've learned about the value of approaching the unknown with humility instead of arrogance, about the importance of listening instead of assuming, and about the universal need for connection and understanding. And I've learned that sometimes the most important discoveries happen not in laboratories or lecture halls, but in quiet moments of empathy between beings who are willing to see past their differences and recognize their shared need for companionship. As we reach my dormitory, Gorath settles down beside my door with a contented rumble, his scaled head resting on his massive paws. "Tomorrow, We'll probably get called to look at another behavioral problem somewhere on campus. Another creature that's been misunderstood, categorized and studied, but never truly seen. And we'll help, because that's what friends do. They help each other find their way home. Even if home is just a scratch behind the ears and the simple knowledge that someone cares enough to pay attention. Especially then,